Hey guys, so before I get into the real video, I need to talk to you about something really serious. If you're triggered by bombings or war, I suggest skipping to this time. But if you're not, I highly suggest that you stick around and listen to what I have to say because it's way more important than some video game theory, and also, if you act on what I'm telling you, you could save a life. At the time of recording this, Russian troops have invaded Ukraine within the past 24 hours. At least 40 are confirmed to be dead, although I'm personally sure that there are way more who are unrecorded. Bombs were dropped on major cities, and right now Ukrainians are attempting to flee their homes in favor of other countries or bomb shelters. The Ukrainian army fought to keep Chernobyl safe, but as of right now, the site and some of its personnel have been captured by the Russian army. This attack was absolutely unprovoked, and Ukraine is entirely innocent despite what Russian President Vladimir Putin says. We should not blame the Russian people as a whole, but rather their governing body instead. Right now, world leaders are discussing how to address the situation and help Ukraine. As for us, there are some ways we can help too. In the pinned comment, I've linked to several creditable charities that you can donate to. And if you can't do that, the next best thing for you to do is just educate yourself. There's a lot of misinformation going around right now, so along with the charities, there's links to news coverage from reliable outlets in the pinned comment. If you're Ukrainian and you have any other resources I need to share, please let me know and I'll put them in the pinned comment as well. And if you're actually watching this from Ukraine, I seriously hope you can stay safe and that this will de-escalate quickly.
Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory! Last week we started analyzing volume 2 of the Byakuyakoku collection. From what we've looked at so far, I've come up with a loose timeline for early Teyvat. So far, I believe that a long time ago, Celestia was actually overthrown by an entity known as the Primordial One. The Primordial One killed the 7 sovereigns who were Old Teyvat's equivalent of the current Archons. After that, a Noah's Ark-style flooding happened when the Primordial One decided to reform the world with their newfound power. Then they created humans and coexisted peacefully with them for a while until the quote, path to temptation was discovered. Now that the recap is out of the way, let's get into the second half of Volume 2. The timeline presented in Volume 2 of the Byakuyakoku collection is often interrupted by ellipses, implying that events are missing from the timeline we have scribed right now. The next set of uninterrupted events is the Funerary Year, the First Year of Darkness, the Parable of the Sun, the Parable of the Lethed Lotus, and the Third Year of Darkness. Since we're here to talk about Celestia and Teyvat as a whole, I'm going to skip over every year except for the Funerary Year and the Third Year of Darkness. The other events really just address Enkanomiya, and while that's a really interesting topic, I think it's best to save it for another day. The second throne of the heavens came and war was rekindled as it was in the world's creation. That day the heavens collapsed and the earth was rent asunder. Our ancestors in their ancestral land fell into this place during that conflict. The era of darkness had begun. So the second throne of the heavens came. That's new. So far, we've only heard one story of a power struggle in the heavens in this volume alone, so I'm honestly surprised to see another one here. The Primordial One fought with whoever the second throne of the heavens is, which caused Teyvat to get messed up somehow, leaving Byakuyakoku to sink into the ocean and to form what we now know as Enkanomiya. I think it's worth noting that although the next few events are irrelevant to today's theories, they do have one thing we can really work with. They imply that Enkanomiyans felt betrayed by the Primordial One. Whether or not the Primordial One purposefully sunk Byakuyakoku is unknown, but right now I think it was an accident. Not like that matters, no, because right now it is way too late. We knew the only one who had not forsaken us as the ruler of time. She was the moment, she was every moment. She was the measure of 1,000 winds and the sun and the moon. She was every second of joy, every moment of rage, every instant of longing, every minute of obsession. She was every flash of delirium. We call her Kairos, or the ruler of the unchanging world. We dare not speak her true, secret name, so I pen it here only once and in reverse. H-T-O-R-A-T-S-I. This is the real god of time that we've been looking for so long. Her name is Istaroth, which is a bastardization of Astaroth, yet another name from the Lesser Key of Solomon. Istaroth's real-life religious counterpart honestly doesn't help us much here, but I do think it's worth mentioning that the demon Astaroth has a connection to snakes. So we first heard about the god of time in Mondstadt, but she's actually from Inazuma. We rarely see gods go back and forth from their country of origin to another. The only example I can really think of is the Thunderbird who regularly left Surumi Island. Other than that, gods really just stay in one country except for a few isolated and short instances. Regardless, the god of time seems to be generally forgotten in both countries she existed in. I made a whole video about her never coming up in Mondstadt despite being a huge part of its early history, and now we see something similar in Inazuma. Nearly all traces of her existence seem to be confined to Enkanomiya. Enkanomians kind of saw Istaroth as a replacement for the Primordial One who they believed had betrayed them. But we also know that Istaroth must have abandoned them at some point too, because we see traces of her in Mondstadt. Aside from Istaroth, the god of time is also referred to as Kairos. Kairos is a Greek term for opportunity or precise and important moments in time. The word comes from the Greek god Kairos, who is one of two gods who represent time in Greek mythology. While Kairos represents significant events in the moment, Chronos represents linear time. To put it simply, think of Chronos as time measured on a clock and Kairos as time measured in terms of important events. I don't think there's another god of time out there in Teyvat though, because Istaroth's Greek name comes from the word for opportunity, not the actual god of it. But I do think the dual nature of time and the culture her story is derived from can be drawn from for our purposes. After all, she did exist in two places. So for Genshin's purposes, I think her character can be connected to both Kairos and Chronos, despite being named after the former. And even though she's named after a word that refers to action in a significant moment, Istaroth seems to be really behind on important events. She shows up in Enkanomiya a whole 3 years after it sank into the ocean. If she's meant to be doing stuff at the right time, why did she wait so long to go down there and help? Since there's no reason I can see from her end, it just looks like she's incompetent to me. This wouldn't be the first time Enkanomians have placed their trust in an incompetent god though, it happened before with the Primordial One. Somewhere along the way, Istaroth must have betrayed their trust as well because they moved on to Urabashi as their guardian deity. I think that at that point, Istaroth left Enkanomiya to go to Mondstadt for unknown reasons. Maybe she knew that Urabashi was going to sacrifice himself, so she wanted to leave Inazuma to save herself. Urabashi learned something about Celestia that he wasn't supposed to, and because of that, he attacked Yashiori Island to get A to kill him so he could protect Enkanomiya, which became Watatsumi Island. If Istaroth knew that, then she would know why Urabashi had to die, and in turn potentially know the truth about Celestia. It looks like she attempted to flee the impending disaster in Inazuma only to be completely erased from everyone's memory and most of history, leaving only small traces of her existence in Enkanomiya and Mondstadt. Now, how does this relate to the main point of this video? Remember the funerary year when the second throne showed up? Personally, I believe this could be Istaroth. Not only does it make sense chronologically, but thematically as well. Phanes is believed to be the name of the Primordial One, who we've established as the ruler of the heavens at this point in the timeline. Phanes is one of a few primordial gods in Greek mythology, along with Kronos. Like I said before, I think Istaroth is loosely based on the Greek god Kronos, which draws an immediate connection from her to the Primordial One. And if anyone were to challenge the Primordial One, it would be her. Her arrival in Teyvat caused Enkanomians to lose their trust in the Primordial One, only for Istaroth to come in and take over. This part of the theory still has plenty of holes in it though. If Istaroth was at some point a celestial god, then why did she just vanish? If she was so dedicated to taking over Enkanomiya, why did she so easily abandon it once a problem arose? I'm honestly not sure. Aside from her being a real god, I'm also open to entertaining the idea of her being a fictional figure in Teyvat. Kairos is just a word in real life that refers to opportunity, so maybe that's all she is in Genshin too. For all we know, she's just a mere personification of a concept. Again, that leaves a lot to be desired, but it would explain why finding a person identifiable as Istaroth is so challenging. Her elusivity could be attributed to the fact that she may have never existed at all. The god of time has always been and will continue to be one of the most confusing characters in Genshin's lore, and not to be ironic, but I hope that we'll come to understand her story more with time. After the Third Era is interrupted by ellipses, only one event is recorded before being interrupted again. It's just about the creation of White Knight and Enkanomiya, which really has nothing to do with our topic today, so I'll skip it. After that, the next set of events are the Year of Sight, or the first year of Sun and Moon, the second year of Sun and Moon, the Parable of the Tree, and the 10th year of Sun and Moon. The only ones we really need to discuss today are the middle two, so I'll be skipping the Year of Sight and the 10th year of the Sun and the Moon. Our ancestors sought the returning way, for surely the war on the surface had ended by then, but the Primordial One, or the First Throne, had laid down a ban preventing our ancestors from finding the path home. In that case, the Primordial One must have defeated the second who came. Abrax was imprisoned by the order of the Sunchild. The war on the surface is likely the Archon War. It makes sense with the timeline and with the Primordial One's actions. If Enkanomiya sinking was really an accident on their part, then it would actually make sense for the Primordial One to keep them down there. After all, the surface was wildly unsafe during the Archon War. The Primordial One must have defeated the second who came is really interesting. For a long time, I've been suspecting that there are 3 celestial gods based on what Venti says in the webcomic, but from this, it seems to just be the Primordial One. The King's Gardener and the tree spirit of the Royal Garden were in love. But the king wished to repair the beams of his pavilion and so needed to cut down the tree with the most spiritual energy within it. The king was the incarnation of the primordial one, and the gardener could not defy the sovereign of sovereigns, and so he could only bring his plea to the king's priest, who was the incarnation of Tokuyo Okami. The priest had pity on the gardener and said to him, "Go and cut the branches of the spirit tree down." The gardener did so and afterward did as the king ordered, cutting the spirit tree itself down. Then the priest said, "Plant the spirit tree's branches in the ground." But the gardener said, "A spirit tree shall take 500 years to grow." The priest said, "Your one thought shall echo through eternity." And so the gardener planted the branches in his backyard. In an instant, the slim branches grow into a new tree, and the new tree spirit was a continuation of the past one. For it is the god of moments who was able to take seeds from this moment into the past and the future. This entry is totally out of left field. It doesn't fit in with any of the other events in the Byakuyakoku collection, despite being the final entry before a goodbye from its scribe. I think this is describing what the ley lines are and what led to their fate. Like we've already established, the primordial one is likely a celestial god, maybe even the only one. The primordial one is the king in the story, and the priest is Tokuyo Okami, who is confirmed to be the god of time. We don't have a concrete identity for the gardener, but to be honest, I don't know if that necessarily matters right now. I assume it's some random god we haven't met yet, but I could be wrong. In the story, the gardener is in love with the tree spirit, but the primordial one orders the gardener to cut the tree down. Istaroth, the god of time, then told the gardener to plant the branches of the tree in order to bring back the spirit. The gardener said it would take 500 years for it to regrow. Remember that 500 years is thematically tied to Khaenri'ah, more specifically the Cataclysm. Despite the gardener's thoughts, the tree actually grew instantly thanks to the god of time's interference. So in the end, everyone got what they wanted. The primordial one got the tree cut down, and the gardener got their beloved tree spirit back. But this entry is labeled as a parable. A parable is a fictional story meant to teach important moral or religious lessons. This label implies that the story never actually happened, but I do think something similar did. Let's talk about the god of time's role in this. She magically grows the tree even though it was supposed to take 500 years. She didn't just make 500 years go by quickly in general, it was only in relation to that specific tree. Now let me introduce you to a concept in quantum mechanics called the many worlds theory. This theory states that the universe branches into multiple timelines every time a quantum measurement is made. Basically, that just means the timeline splits into more than one every time a decision is made. Imagine you're in a room with two doors. You can either choose to enter the door on the left or the door on the right. If you choose the left door, then that's what happens in the timeline you live in. But there's also another timeline where you chose to walk through the right door, but that's not the timeline that this version of you lives in. I think the story we were told in the Byakuyakoku collection about the tree spirit is one of two timelines, and it just so happens to be the timeline that we aren't living in. Instead, I think we live in a timeline where Istaroth didn't speed up the growth of the replanted tree branches. That means the gardener actually did have to wait for those 500 years for the tree spirit to regrow. Whether or not they survived through those 500 years doesn't matter. As the tree spirit grew, so did its roots, which became what we now know as the ley lines that lie beneath Teyvat's surface. Those ley lines wouldn't be finished growing for 500 years, and once those 5 centuries had passed, they would be fine. But since it took such a long time, the roots were bound to be tampered with at some point. That would explain why ley line disorders exist. In the story, the primordial one seems to have no problem with the replanting of the tree. It really just sounds like they wanted the wood from it, but we're fine with a few branches being planted to bring the spirit back. At the end, we don't see the primordial one take down the rebuilt tree again. They really don't seem to care. Last week, we talked about the primordial one's covenants. A covenant is an agreement between a god and humanity. I think the primordial one and the gardener had a covenant in relation to this tree. The primordial one wanted materials from this tree to build a pavilion, so I assume that means they wanted it all. But we know that a few branches survived and were replanted by the gardener. That must mean that the primordial one and the gardener entered a deal in which they could both get what they wanted. In return for providing them with wood, the primordial one would allow the gardener to replant the tree and protect its growth over the next 500 years. But somewhere along the way, the roots that we now know as ley lines were meddled with, which did serious damage to the growth of the tree. 500 years is thematically related to Khaenri'ah, which was famously underground. If anyone were to have access to these roots, it would be them. Khaenri'ahns are known for their experiments in technology, so it doesn't sound completely out of character for them to tamper with these strange roots that just showed up in their underground civilization. This would anger the primordial one, whose job it is to protect the growth of the tree. Along with many other reasons, this could be one of the causes for Celestia's attack on Khaenri'ah. If it wasn't just for their hubris, then it was also for their interruption of an important task. To me, that adds more evidence to the idea of Khaenri'ah being the aggressor. Of course, Celestia is far from innocent, but so is Khaenri'ah. They were both in the wrong and both suffered greatly. So is Celestia innocent? No. But I do understand where they were coming from to a certain extent. Like I said at the beginning of the video, please educate yourself about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, and donate to Ukrainian charities if you can. I was actually going to make this video a fundraiser for a Ukrainian charity, but you have to have at least 10k subscribers to set up a charity here on YouTube. So if you know any other ways of doing that here, please let me know. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!